Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating dynamic that, honestly, almost every product manager, engineer, or designer out there has run into at some point. Just picture this for a second. A customer complaint rolls in. Maybe a sales rep flags it, or an executive hears a grumble at an industry conference. And then, boom, the familiar rush kicks in. Literally within 24 hours, someone has already sketched out a whole solution. By the time you sit down to actually talk about it, the conversation has entirely blown past, hey, is this even a real problem? And fast-forwarded straight to, okay, how do we build this feature? The actual problem itself, like who has it, why they have it, what it's costing them, gets maybe 90 seconds of thought. But the solution? Oh, that's going to get 6 weeks of dedicated engineering time. Welcome to the solution trap. Okay, let's dive right into this. To figure out how to pull ourselves out of this trap, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Inside the solution trap. 2. The illusion of progress. 3. Flipping the 80-20 ratio. 4. Evidence, needs, and constraints. 5. The speed paradox. And finally, 6. The practical shift.
So, kicking things off with part 1, inside the solution trap, or as we like to call it, the 90-second problem.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth do so many incredibly smart, talented people fall into this trap? Well, it's not a failure of intelligence at all. It's really a failure of incentives and, well, basic human nature. You see, solutions are beautifully concrete. A feature request like add a dashboard or send a push notification, it has a visible shape to it, right? You can estimate it, you can design it, you can demo it to your boss, it just feels good. Problems, on the other hand, they are ambiguous. They're these slippery, messy tangles. Actually, pinning down a problem requires deep investigation, and honestly, doing that can kind of feel like you're just wandering around in the dark.
Moving to section 2, the illusion of progress and why the system actually rewards solutions.
So what's the actual cost here? The tricky thing is, doing problem work, stuff like talking to customers and synthesizing pages of notes, looks like absolutely nothing is happening if you're just casually glancing at a roadmap. Pretty much every corporate system we use is wired to reward solutions. Jira tracks features. Quarterly performance reviews celebrate shipped deliverables. And here's the kicker. Shipping a feature that completely misses the mark looks exactly like progress right up until the metrics totally flatline. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that defaulting to solution mode fundamentally breaks down your team's mental model of the product. You end up with this patchwork of imprecise solutions. And eventually you produce that dreaded software experience we've all used. A bloated product packed with 100 features that users just do not trust, simply because none of it feels like it was built by someone who actually understood their friction.
Which brings us to section 3, flipping the 80-20 ratio. This is the provocative shift.
Think about the broken state that most teams are living in today. They're spending a whopping 80% of their time and effort on solution delivery, writing the code, designing interfaces, pushing things out the door. And maybe, just maybe, 20% of their time actually trying to figure out what's broken in the first place. It's like having a high-powered engine that's running incredibly fast, but completely in the wrong direction.
But there is a totally different way to operate. The absolute best product organizations in the world flip this ratio entirely on its head. They spend 80% of their time living in the problem space, deeply, intimately understanding the user's friction, and only 20% in actual solution delivery. The result? Well, they ship fewer things, sure, but the things they do ship actually work, and they hit the mark perfectly the first time around.
All right, section 4, evidence, needs, and constraints. Let's get into the playbook.
To actually run this playbook, the very first thing we have to nail down is the difference between articulation and evidence. Look, a lot of teams are fantastic at articulating a problem. Someone can stand up in a meeting room and describe a user's pain so clearly, so persuasively, that everyone just nods along in agreement. But here's the catch. Articulation is not evidence. A great story might convince people to kick off a project, but hard evidence like, say, 4 recorded user interviews, a really clear pattern in your support tickets, or a rigorously proven hypothesis, that is what should actually dictate what you build.
Next up, we really need to separate the request from the root need. Usually a request is just a solution wearing a disguise. For example, a user says, hey, add a CSV export. If you immediately jump into evaluating how to build that CSV export, guess what? You're trapped in solution mode. But if you take a beat and ask the root need questions, like, why do you need to move this data? Where is it going after you export it? What actually happens if you can't do this? That's how you stay in problem mode. You really have to force yourself to sit in that uncomfortable, ambiguous problem space a lot longer than feels natural.
And that brings us directly to the explicit problem statement. A true, real problem statement is a highly detailed description of user friction, including the exact cost of that friction, whether that's costing them time, money, or trust. What it is absolutely not is a feature description. If you say, we need better insight attribution, well, that's just a solution-shaped description of a problem. A real statement sounds way more like, customers can't identify which data sources contributed to an insight, meaning they don't trust the output, which is costing them 30 minutes of manual checking every single time. You see the difference there? It's night and day. So this explicit statement flows right into what we call the hierarchy question. It's basically a simple 3-step process to make sure you're not just slapping a Band-Aid over a symptom. Step 1 is identifying that initial symptom. Then, step 2 is the magic question. If we solved this, what would still be broken? By forcing yourself to ask that, you naturally transition right into step 3, which is uncovering the true root constraint. Because if you just build a shiny new solution for a surface-level symptom, you're usually just creating a brand new problem, all while the original upstream cause sits there entirely untouched.
Let's move to section 5, the speed paradox. And I know what you're thinking right about now. Don't we need to ship?
Here's the honest truth. Investing heavily in the problem space actually makes teams so much faster in the long run. Sure, teams that skip the problem work might ship faster initially, but then what happens? They spend 3 miserable months in post-launch discovery scratching their heads, asking why nobody is using the new feature and why the core metrics haven't budged an inch. On the flip side, front-loading the problem work means that when you finally do enter solution mode, you absolutely fly. Your design brief is razor-sharp. You've already ruled out all the dead ends before engineering writes a single line of code. Plus, you completely avoid those awkward mid-sprint pivots where someone suddenly stops and asks, wait, is this actually what users want?
I really want this specific point to sink in. Skipping problem understanding is not speed, it's debt. Literally, every single time you rush into building a solution without defining the exact friction first, you are basically taking out a high-interest loan on your product's usability and your users' trust. And trust me, eventually, that debt comes due.
Finally, Section 6, the practical shift, earning your features. The good news here is you don't need to go and invent some massive, cumbersome, new operational process to fix all of this. What you really need is just a mindset shift. Always remember this. Every single product that users truly love was built by a team that stayed in the problem longer than the team who shipped the competing feature. That's why this entire framework matters so deeply. The ultimate goal isn't just shipping for the sake of shipping. It's about building something that genuinely solves real-world friction and earns absolute trust from your users. The solution trap is so comfortable because it looks exactly like productivity. But real, deep understanding, that's usually invisible.
So we're going to leave you today with a golden rule. Before a single feature ever hits your backlog again, someone in the room has to ask this: what is the evidence that this is the problem, and not just a symptom of something else? If you can answer that clearly and quickly, congratulations, you've earned the feature. It's ready to be built. But if you can't, that is your clear, flashing signal to step back. So take a hard look at your current roadmap right now. Are you actually solving root problems, or are you just comfortably spinning your wheels inside the trap? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.